Hello, today is August 20th, 2009. We're meeting today with Mr. Gordon Breiner?
Breiner.
At his home in Loveland, Colorado. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm the interviewer for the Northern Colorado Veterans History Project. Welcome, Gordon, and from what I understand, you prefer to go by Dick, correct?
That's right, Brad.
Okay. Well, thank you for sitting down to tell your story today. Let's start out, if we could. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your date of birth, where you were born, a little bit about your family.
I was born December the 1st, 1922 in Chanute, Kansas. My dad was, he'd worked on a railroad, but they had a strike in 1922. So he worked around Chanute, and after the strike was over, then we all moved to Pittsburg, Kansas, which is about 60 miles from Chanute. My dad was in World War I.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and he was in the ammunition truck. He broke his leg, but how he done that? He was playing football over there. And when he came back, he finished his time on the railroad, apprenticeship, yes.
Okay.
So he worked on the railroad. He retired 45 years.
Did you have any brothers or sisters?
I had one sister, and she, like I said, I was sick the first year and missed, and so when she's in the 5th grade, she skipped in 6th, so we ended up graduating same time.
And you went through the school system there in Pittsburgh?
Yes.
Okay, you graduated from Pittsburgh?
Yes,
Okay.
clear up. I graduated in 1941.
Okay. Well, let's before we get into your military experience, can I ask you a few questions about? Do you have many memories of the Depression? Did it affect your family at all, or?
You know, I think there's one time my dad worked 4 days, but all the time the depression really didn't affect too much because he always worked, always had a car.
Okay.
We always had a house, and the summertime, every summer I'd go up to my aunt's farm, and that was my joy. Instead of staying in Pittsburgh, I got up, I learned how to milk the cows and drive the tractor combine. That was all during the Depression, so I really enjoyed the time that I learned up on. In fact, that's my ambition, to be a farmer.
Oh, is that right?
But I ended up being a welder.
Well, another question I'd like to ask about a big event in that area, and you may have been too far east of it, but were you affected at all by the Dust Bowl?
No, just a couple of times. I remember the sky kind of getting yellow, and the dust is far away. But we was far enough. We was only about 10 miles from Missouri and 30 miles from Oklahoma, so we didn't affect it with the dust.
Okay. So you graduated in 1941. That would be the spring of 41?
Spring of 41.
So that'd be a good 6 months before Pearl Harbor. What did you do when you got out of high school?
Well, first job, I worked in a grocery store. I helped them stock and I delivered groceries. This is kind of a mom and pop. Wilson was her name, and I worked there for a while, and then I got a job. In fact, the grocery store was only about 3 blocks, and I got a job at the filling station, which was around 4 or 5 blocks. It was on Broadway in Pittsburgh. So I washed cars and filled up things. And my dad could kind of see I was getting nowhere. So December the 5th, these fellows from California come to go to welding school. At that time, I think it was $260, which is a lot of money at that time. But my dad put out the money, and so eventually, the time, it was after they bombed Pearl Harbor, December the 10th, that I went to California to go to welding school. So this brings up the time when they bombed Pearl Harbor.
Wow.
I remember because we went to Chanute, Kansas. That's where my mother and dad lived, the Gordons, and we visited them before I was going to go to California. So we just went ready to go outside, and we heard on the radio that that's when they made the news that they bombed Pearl Harbor. So I remember that very vividly, when they did that. And so I was ready to go to welding school. My mother says, "You can't go to California. Those Japanese are going to bomb around
Right,
the L area."
right.
I said, "No, they won't." So anyway, she kind of got over that.
Huh. So then you left the 10th to go out to California?
Yes.
Wow.
There was two fellows that signed up, and they had a car, so we drove out to Alhambra and go to welding school.
How was that? I mean, I imagine that was probably the first time, like many of your generation, you guys didn't travel too far away from home. That was probably your first time away from home, or?
Yes,
Yeah.
so to go to Kansas City.
Yeah,
Now,
right.
I did remember one time that my dad worked on a railroad, Kansas City Southern, and it went from Kansas City to Port Arthur, Texas. And I remember one time that the whole family, and that was the first time I saw a palm tree. And I wasn't very old
Yeah.
when we went down.
Yeah.
So, and then we go up to Kansas City. My mother and sister liked to shop a lot, so they'd use a pass to go to Kansas City.
But now here you're going halfway to the other end of the country for welding school. Where was the school at?
The original school was in part of an airport in Alhambra, California, and then certain lengths of time they went to Pasadena, California, and I stayed not too far from where they played the Rose Bowl, and I was going to welding school, so my dad was paying where I lived. I said, "Well, I better get a job so I can kind of pay my own way." So I ended up, it was an ice cream and sandwich shop, and this lady took a liking to me. Anyway, I washed dishes and did all the heavy work, and I never will forget, this was before I got into service, in December, she got me a ticket to go see a Rose Bowl.
Oh, is that right?
The Georgia, and I can't remember the other team, but this is in 1942. See, I took the welding test, I think in May, and I went down Cal Ship. Well, first I went down San Pedro, and I passed the flat and overhead. See, they give you 3 flat, vertical, and overhead
Okay.
tests go in the shipyard. So I passed the flat and the overhead, and so I went down, I believe it was around May sometime, and I got in the shipyard, so I was a 2-position welder. Then about after a month there, I took the vertical. Vertical is the hardest. At that time, it's stick welding, and vertical is the hardest, so I passed that. And at that time, in the shipyards, I was making $1.36 an hour, and that was a lot of
Was that
money.
good wages
In
back then?
42.
Yeah,
That's pretty
yeah.
good. And I was working in, now they was building those ships, Liberty ships, in 29 days. A lot of it was built out in a way where they did prefab before, and when these big cranes, they'd grab that big part, you'd look up and they'd take over and drop, because they'd have pretty big hunks to make a ship in 29 days.
Wow, wow.
And so, and the best welders on the outside the hull, the top welders. I wasn't the top, but I just started. So I worked there, probably a couple of months, and I got transferred to the outfitting docks, which is a whole different job, because the ship already went down the way, and they took it over to the outfitting, and we put all types. They put booms on there for lift things and the finish, because it's just a skeleton when it went down the way. So we finished the ship, so that was, I liked that. It was very good. So in November, I went back to Pittsburg, Kansas to visit my folks. There's two young guys going back, so they said, "You want to go back?" There's somewhere in Oklahoma. Anyway, I ended up going back, and I only stayed there about a week because I just took off of work. Because when I got back, I knew I was going to be drafted. At first, I was going to volunteer. They closed enlistments in Long Beach. That's where I lived at the time.
Well, even though you worked at the shipyards, you couldn't have got an exemption from.
Well, you know, I think I did kind of got an exemption because, like I said, I went back, and I went back to Long Beach on the train, and these young guys were going back to be in the Marines. They said, "Well, how come you're not in the service?" Because I was a little, you see, at that time, no, I was only 19. But anyway, they was going back, and they was wondering how come I was in the service. So I got back, and I got greetings from the president. So some reason they closed enlistments, and I went to L.A. and there's a guy. He was a what am I saying? He wasn't. He was about second up. Anyway, and you think this guy was a general in the way he went around. So we had the first guys that had a choice. You had a choice of the Army, the Navy, and the Marine. So I took the Navy. And I talked to this Navy guy, Navy enlistment fella, and that's how I got into Seabees.
Now, how of the three services, here's a boy from landlocked Kansas, how did you come to choose the Navy?
Well, that's an interesting question. I didn't want the Army because I could see the way they had, and the Seabees was a construction, and I was a welder, and I didn't think I wanted to be on a ship all the time, so this was kind of in between. I thought the Seabees was probably...
So your objective was to get into the Seabees, then more so, probably, because with your welding experience?
Yeah, about all the guys that there's either carpenters or mechanics, welders, or, and that's how come I happened to Phil Bamnick and I become friends, because he was from Winona, Minnesota, and he worked for the government on a barge on the Mississippi, and he was a welder.
Oh, okay.
So we had a lot in common.
Okay. All right. So after all that, how much sooner after you signed up did you ship off?
Well, February the 3rd is when I got, and you know, I don't know the exact date, but it was a couple of weeks.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's when we got on was going to Camp Perry, Virginia, which clear across the state.
Right.
So we was on a Pullman, on a train, and which we lived pretty good. And we went to Chicago. That's the first time I was there in Chicago. Transferred to another train, and I believe we went to Roanoke, Virginia, and then we got on a bus and went to Camp Perry.
Okay.
Now this is where I took my boot training. I remember the first thing that I had I had a nice leather jacket, slacks and everything, put my dress clothes in a box and ship them back to my folks. And then they asked you what size shoes you wear and all your clothes. And so this is when you get all your work, your fatigues and your dress clothes. And then we had all our shots. And I remember it wasn't Quonset, these are just kind of barracks. And at that time it was February, and it was damp and everything. So I remember, I don't know, I couldn't tell you his name, on the instructor that gives some boot camp. And if you made a mistake, you had to run around the field. And this one fella, he couldn't hardly keep his right from left knee, but had a heck of a time. And Camp Perry's still on the map there. And the first Liberty we went to was Williamsburg, which is not far from Camp Perry.
Okay. Wow.
And you know, that's quite a historical place. Really the only place I remember distinctly it was a restaurant where we went to eat. And so after we was boot camp, and then the February, March, we was boot camp about 6 weeks.
How did you find that transition going from civilian life to military life? Was that much of a transition for you?
You know, these all these young fellows around, and we was kind of all this together, and I really just was in this same boat there. So
Yeah.
I really, and being that I'd been out in California, I didn't get homesick like maybe a lot
Okay,
of,
right,
a lot
sure.
of people. And so we went to Camp Endicott, and then we took the advanced training, and that place is a little more advanced. They have bowling alleys and stuff. So, and I was always the guy in payday. I don't know why, but there's about 4 or 5 guys that come to me for money. And it's kind of just the same money all the time. They'd come, they want to go on Liberty, and they'd say, "Can you loan me money?" I'd say, "Sure." So I don't know how come I had more money than they did, but I did.
You became the banker, huh?
So, and then we embarked in August. We went to New York. We got on the Queen Elizabeth.
Well, now, had you been put into a company at that time, or were you still unattached, or were you still?
I was in Company A. Right. And then we was in different groups from that, but I couldn't tell you, but I was in Company A.
But you've been formed up into a group. You weren't traveling, not alone, but
Yes.
a group. What company A of a particular battalion or?
81st
80,
Battalion.
81st?
81st. And I don't know his first name, but Greenwald was our commander.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And he was he owned a construction business, so he knew the.
Okay.
And so we got on the boat in New York, Queen Elizabeth, and out so far we was escorted by planes. And after we got out far enough, we was on our own. Because the ship was too fast.
So no worries about German subs or anything like that?
No.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you one question I always like to ask all you guys that took that journey across the big pond. Once again, here's a boy from landlocked Kansas. How was that journey for you? Did you get your sea legs, or did you get seasick, or how was the trip for you?
Well, Queen Elizabeth was a pretty good sized ship. And evidently later on I've been on ships that's gotten pretty rough water, but this ship was pretty calm. We didn't run into any really rough weather, and it took us about 4.5 days to get
Oh, that was a quick trip.
Scotland on the Clyde. Now we was on probably 30, 40 miles from Glasgow, which Penarth was the name of the little inlet. Whether it's a town or how come, but that's where it was at. Excuse me, and you gotta get a drink of water.
Where we left off, you're talking about that little inlet in Scotland.
Penarth.
Yeah.
No, wait a minute. Roseneath. What's that? And Ellensburg was just across the Clyde there. Like I say, we took this boat across, and
For Liberty?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And the dog was kind of hanging around camp, and we started go back and forth, going Liberty. Well, he'd ride in the boat, and that's what's calling Liberty Hound.
Liberty Hound.
Yeah. So I think the first thing I noticed is, you know, in Kansas, we had a home and over there, and they lived in flats, which is like apartments.
Right. Uh-huh.
And it was a completely different style of living than what we're used to
Sure,
here
yeah,
in the
yeah.
United States.
Yeah.
And they had the fish and chips, and we had to get used to their money. They had the pound,
Uh-huh.
which at that time was worth $4. I think it's only worth $1 something now. And they'd buy something to say 2 and 6. You'd have to figure out the money and all that, so that's different. So we had no idea why we were over in the British Isles.
Right.
So we got on a train. We went to Penarth, Wales. That is about 30 miles or so from Cardiff, Wales. And that was one of the most restful places. And the whole time I was in service, I must say, is it was a resort place.
Hmm.
And we stayed these old homes. They fixed it up, and we had, you know, several in the bedroom, but we had these old homes they fixed up. And the only work we did, they had a big warehouse that we unloaded and stocked and that. And of course, it's just in town after we worked, you just go downtown, and they had a dance hall. It was over the water. I don't know what you call it, pavilion, what it was a place. And they had a pub right across the street, and we'd drink a couple of beers and they'd dance. And people there were very sociable, and they had these little shops and theaters. And so I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And probably, you know, they had everything blackout was done. And after one evening, I was taking this young lady back home. And so I walked, and of course it's dark,
Mm-hmm.
foggy this time. And so after I took her home and walked back, this cat laid out of blood screeching, yeah. And I bet you the hair on the back of my head went straight up. Now that was probably the one of the most scary times over there. Anyway, I remember. So, and then on a weekend, we could get on the train. London, I couldn't tell you how far it was, but we went on London on the weekend.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Now, was there still a lot of bomb damage when you in London there? You
You
remember?
know, the part we went to, no,
Okay.
I didn't see it.
Okay.
And but they had a very good subway system
Mhm.
there. In fact, that's where the people went when they had the bombing there. And so then after, let's see, about April or May, we went to Plymouth, England,
This is a 44.
44.
Okay.
So this is the first time that we was over in the British Isles, that we had any inkling what was going on, and so they kind of had to start saying that there's going to be these barges on thing, and some of them were going to learn how to handle when they unloaded the ship, how to unload,
Mhm.
and I was going to be the signalman. Of course, I'd do other things after we found out where we was going. So on, we got on this LST, and these barges was pontoons 5 by 7 deep, and it's all together with large angles. And on the front, they could drop the bow so we could unload, and they had 2 large marine motors on the back. And they towed these, we call them rhinos, and behind the LST across the English Channel. And
But at this point, you still didn't know what. Had they let you on about the invasion yet, or did you have it?
No,
Okay.
we didn't, what was gonna,
Yeah.
so, that was, English Channel was really rough, June the 5th, that's why they didn't land the 5th. And I had KP duties, I was in there, and I got sick of the dog, and I said, no matter what you say to me, I gotta go lay down. So and it sort of, it calmed down the next morning, and I remember being down in the LST, and we could hear some depth charges,
Mm.
and we found out we was going to the beach, so they opened up the front, and whoever was doing the engines on the after they brought it around front.
Well, let me interrupt you here for those that'll watch this tape. An LST was one of the large flat-bottom ships that went right up to the beach and dropped open.
Yeah,
Okay.
the front opened up.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Continue your story there.
Yeah. And they also had LST did that too. The, LST was pretty good sized ship.
Yeah. Right.
And and then they brought the barge around, the Rhino barge, and we got on the barge, and there was anti-aircraft army that they loaded on the barge. So we started out, this was around 10 o'clock in the morning. We didn't go when we was going to the beach, it was around 10 o'clock.
Yeah, but that was what we hit the beaches about 6, didn't we? So you weren't too far off from the original wave, were you?
Well, they already had, the Army had already went in, there's some pillboxes that they knocked out. So as we unloaded and started out, and I stood up on they had a bulldozer in the middle. Now how come they had a bulldozer? But anyway, I stood up there, and the Germans started lobbing 88s at us.
Oh, geez.
But we were going slow, and they'd land on the right-hand side of us. So we got close enough to the beach. They signaled me, and they told me where they wanted in. So we dropped the ramp, and the first guy went off in the Jeep. He had a shell hole, and he had a vest on. He come bobbing up and pulled him out. So we backed off and to another spot. So we hit that right, and we unloaded all of the anti-aircraft unit.
Which beach did you land on?
Utah.
Utah?
Now Utah beach was flat. It was more like it was farmland. Yeah, so it's flat. Now Omaha Beach, as you know, it was
Right,
a
the cliffs.
and they had a lot of casualties.
Can you describe the scene? I mean, you had a front row seat to all this. Can you describe the scene around you, the sky, what you saw on the beach, the ships? Can you give us a description of what that day looked like to you?
Well, it was a calm, sunny day. Of course, I was busy
Right.
waving the flags, and on down the beach, they was doing the same. They was unloading, and so we finally found a calm spot, and the got unloaded, going to back up, and then they didn't raise the props. They broke both props off, so we had to go in and dig a foxhole. Well, at this time, I have pictures. There was already had German prisoners at that time. Well, not too far from these prisoners, we dug a foxhole, and so there was 5 of us. In the center, where we had our stuff, they had some kind of separated off, and we went back to get our stuff. And I was standing there, and I says, "There's 4 planes headed towards us." I said, "Look at them little sparks coming out of the plane." That guy says, "They're strafing us." So they strafed. So we ducked down, and one pilot dropped a bomb. It hit on the back end, raised the barge up, and water all over, but he missed us.
Wow.
So, and then after that scary moment, we went in and stayed in the foxhole that night. Well, there was a farm not too far in, and this is where we ended up going in and setting up where they set up. I got pictures where they had the chow line, and you could see where some of the gliders, you know, a lot of went in with gliders, and they was laying around, some of them were wrecked. And we all, instead of everybody staying together, everybody dug their own foxhole, and this happened. There was a barrage, one of the barrage balloons that busted, so we got that, and we had to line the foxhole with that. So I had this, so I had a pretty good foxhole with, and I can't remember what we laid on, where we had hay, or anyway, it was comfortable. And we was took turns of going out, and we'd go out 24 hours and come back 24 hours and load the ship. And one night we went out, and it was late, so we went on the back hole on this ship. And I don't know what time in the morning it was, we heard a big explosion. The ship next to us, the Germans dropped a bomb in that hole and sunk that ship.
Wow. Oh.
And funny, years later, somebody that in Habitat went there, and I described it. He says the hull of that ship is still sticking out of the water. So, and so finally, September, when Paris was liberated, we actually would go over the hill. I was talking to you about that. 2 at a time, we put our dress uniform in the bag and wore our fatigue, almost looked like the Army. But these truck drivers, red balls, going to Paris, and like to say we went by the city that I don't know how many thousand bombers went over, and they just demolished that town.
What, there was just total devastation
Just
there?
And
Well, you'd mentioned earlier before we started this interview that you used to watch the waves of planes fly over on their way to bombing missions. Can you describe that once again?
yeah, it was just, and it was just kind of all side by side, just going over. And then at night time, I suppose it's when the Germans come over, that was as soon as they start shooting, where you hope some of that flak didn't fall down
Oh,
and
boy.
go through your tent, you know.
Oh, boy.
But we didn't. Yeah, and we never saw too many fighters. We saw them when the bombers go over, and of course we got to Paris and was there a week.
How was that? Was that a good trip?
It was very good. You know, we went to this cabaret, and that's almost, of course, that was before I ever went to Las Vegas.
Yeah.
But and later on, it was much like, you know, the dancing and all that, and they had very nice accommodation. We stayed in a hotel there, and how we got to eat was in this hotel. They had 60 Navy personnel, so we just got in the chow line, and they didn't say what you. We just went through the chow line and ate, and we went to the art. Was at the Louvre, and we got to see Arc de Triomphe and Eiffel Tower. Got to see all
Wow.
Paris.
Wow.
And it was there a week, and we went back, and my sister married Harry Bradshaw. He was in the Army, and we left around the 1st December last November, and he came down to the beach to see me, and was already out on the ship, so I missed him.
Oh, boy.
And the time I got home, little after December the 1st, and he got killed. So, and so I took 30-day leave, and we went back to Rhode Island. So they completely changed everything. We got mosquito netting, so we knew we was going to the Pacific.
So, okay, so you were on Normandy up until September, and then went back to the States from.
Well, no, we was November. We went November, so we left. Oh, bring back the story. The reason we was there so long, there in England, it's going to build this harbor, and it's going to build out of concrete. Of course, the ship is steel and float, but these is great concrete, and it's going to float them across. And that's when the Germans said they were going to sink them, which they didn't. So they got them to the beach, and a week or 2 weeks after D-Day, they had this storm, and it pushed a lot of boats up. Well, it wrecked all this stuff to be in the harbor. So this is why we was there so long. We wasn't going to be there that long, but we was there from June to clear into November, and so
Hoping to kind of build that back up.
well, what they did, I think they probably Cherbourg. See, that's a harbor.
Oh, okay.
I think probably they was using that. Of course, they already had, you know, when we left though, that's when they had the Battle of the Bulge, somewhere in November.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was going pretty good, but that's
Yeah.
when the Germans, the last big stand,
Right,
they had
right.
the Battle of the Bulge.
Right.
So,
So then you went back to the States to, you said back to
and then
province?
right after the 1st of December.
Okay. And
And had 30-day leave.
was that enough time to get back to Kansas? And
Yeah, I was back there. And this happened when I went back. My mother had been in hospital. She had a gallbladder
Huh.
operation. But had a good visit. And of course my sister, she was shaken up with her husband.
Oh,
was
sure.
tough deal.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, that was a tough deal. And so went back to Camp Endicott, and that's when we got mosquito netting, and we got ready. We went to New York again, and got on a boat, and going towards the Panama Canal. We went.
How was that? Describe how that was. That must have been
Yeah,
something.
we went by, and you could see the Gulf was beautiful, and we could see Jamaica from a distance. We went by. And when you go in, before you get into the Panama Canal, just like going into a big lake here, and you go in that lock, and believe it or not, we was there overnight. We went on Liberty.
Wow.
So, and I remember the palm trees over and how the locks, and wasn't very much room on each side of the ship
Right,
as they
yeah.
went through. And so we got on the other side in the Pacific, then we went up to the Hawaiian Islands, and this was in March.
At
And
45.
this is when we got news. I think Franklin Delano Roosevelt died.
Oh,
I think it was in March of
Right.
45.
right. Uh-huh.
So then we got landed, which is pretty close to Pearl Harbor, and we.
Had a lot of that been rebuilt, or was there still damage from, do you remember?
Yeah, you couldn't see
Oh, okay.
much, because while we was there, at one time we all got on a big truck and they drove us all around to see what it looked like
Oh, okay.
on Hawaii.
Yeah.
And I remember going to Honolulu. We went there on Liberty, and I remember we was on the beach, and we went swimming. We didn't have any bathing suit, so we must use the skivvies shorts.
Uh-huh.
We played the part. We was in Hawaii, man. We was going swimming, and so we got on a ship, and I think we stopped at the Marshall Islands, and then we made it to D+3 to Okinawa. We didn't go on
Oh.
D-Day. But as a ship, we was here and another ship over there, and we was on top. And Japanese, I don't know how far away, they started lobbing shells, and these shells landed on the starboard side of this ship next to us, and we was a little far, and they says, we didn't want to go down the hole. They told us you had to go down in the hole. So we went down, and finally, it backed up. We went around on the other side of the island, and we set up camp on the other side, and we was close to Marines there, and we was there, let's see, May, and the Marines were very good to us because we didn't have any beer. The Marines had beer, and they let us have some beer once in a while. And I remember the first time they had some kind of all get together. First time we'd seen a woman in a long time. They had the, I don't know, U.S. some of the a big show there.
Oh, USO type of show?
I can't remember who
Yeah.
was playing. So we got on ship again, and there's a little island out. It started with I. It was in the China Sea, and it was about, this little island was about 3 by 5. This is where Ernie Pyle got killed, and he was the writer for the Stars and Stripes.
Okinawa? Or Iwo Jima?
No,
Wasn't he?
He will,
He was-
that's where the big battle on
Yeah.
No, this is on the small.
You're talking where Ernie was killed?
Yeah, this is,
I think he was killed on Okinawa, if I'm not mistaken.
well, anyway, like Okinawa, and then
Uh-huh.
over here's this little island
Oh, okay.
out in the Yellow Sea towards China. And we did the same thing, we unloaded the ships. And out there where they had sunk, and LST was laying out there, and this, remember when the Japanese committed suicide, they had a name for him.
The kamikazes.
Yeah, and he dove right on that ship. Well, if there's nobody on the ship, it's already sunk.
Huh.
Why he done that? But we got, this is where our mosquito netting come in handy. We have, this place we had tents, and we had to put our mosquito netting around where it goes bad because of dang mice and stuff around.
Wow.
So, and I remember the first time I was on there, not far from the camp, and this lightning, and it had electrical storm, and had an earthquake all at the same time. Where
Oh, wow.
So, and there was a typhoon supposed to come there, so we took all these barges back clear across over to Okinawa, and we went into a bay, and we was there for a while, and we wandered around the hills. It's where the Japanese had been, but they wasn't there then, so we seen all these little small villages where the where the people, well, they wasn't, it was Okinawans or whatever they.
Yeah.
And we could see some of their farmland. So after it's calm, we went back to this little island, and we was in August. We went back to Okinawa, and during that time we was going back. We was going to Guam, and it's going to re-outfit because at the time they was going to plan to invade Japan. So 1 week we got, before war was over, we got on this ship and was going to Guam. Well, Russia got into the war, and then they had that big typhoon, which did a lot of damage to Okinawa. We got out of there, and the day we just got to Okinawa and got on Okinawa, the war was over.
You remember hearing about when they dropped the atomic bomb? I mean, could you imagine what this thing was when you heard that this big, massive bomb had been dropped? It must have been hard to comprehend.
I'm not sure how soon we knew that.
Oh, okay. But you did get.
We did get word later, yes.
What about VJ Day? You guys were.
Yeah, right. The day, VJ Day was the day we landed on Guam.
All right. Was there? I imagine was there.
Yeah.
A big celebration.
Yeah. Everybody was. Yeah. But we knew Russia got in the war, and I don't know how long after that we knew that Truman said drop that bomb, and this saved a lot of lives.
Well, that's one question I always like to ask, because there's always been that controversy whether he should have dropped it or not. But sounds like you would have been in the thick of the invasion.
Yeah,
your thoughts,
we was going to we went to go on to re-outfit. We was going to.
Yeah.
I'd have been right in Japan.
Right.
So I was, of course, all the older guys, they went home first.
You didn't have enough points to, after all you'd been through?
I was a single guy, no points, you know.
Oh.
So, well, and so we just, and all this, a lot of that fancy equipment, they had a breakwater. A lot of that fancy equipment, they just shoved in the ocean.
Wow.
And I remember this one crane operator operated lifting stuff, and he got back too far, and the boom come back. So, but we did odd jobs around there, and I never got out in the jungle or a no town. It's just the base there. And I remember we got, I'm sure it was mutton from Australia. That's why I never developed a taste for lamb. But but they fed us good. I cannot I mean, all the time in Seabees, I cannot complain about anything.
Is that right?
We were treated good,
Yeah.
we were fed good, and all the guys had respect for each other and helped each other. And
How was it though, as far as being over in the Pacific there on these tropical islands with the hot weather? Did that bother you at all, the hot, humid weather, or did you ever succumb to any the diseases like malaria or anything that were
on
common?
Okinawa, you know, that's not too. I think it's only 400 miles from Japan.
Oh, okay, all right.
So I think the water in or the weather in Okinawa, I don't remember, it was kind of moderate. I don't,
Okay.
you know, some parts of Japan get snow, but we, as far as they, no snow there,
Yeah,
Okinawa. And the temperature, I don't remember ever being. Now Guam is farther south. I guess I was young enough, I never did complain
yeah.
too much about
Yeah.
the weather, but there I don't remember being.
Did you ever cross over the equator where you had to go through the polywog ceremony or anything like that?
I think we did go over that line, but I don't. That's before you get to Okinawa. I don't remember any. Yeah, I know they do certain rituals.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't.
So when the war ended, or when Japan finally surrendered, you guys were in Guam, and you just remained in Guam, or did you ever have to
Yeah.
go back up for part of the occupation forces?
No, we
Okay.
stayed on Guam.
Okay.
And I remember, you know, Eleanor Roosevelt, when she created a lot of criticism, but which really makes sense now. She says, all these young guys ought to go back and be rehabilitated.
Uh-huh.
You know, just like these young guys come back from Iraq, what they're doing now.
Right.
They're straightening them out because, now I didn't go through that, a lot of traumatic,
Right.
like a lot of guys in the Army, you know, where they was on the front line and
Yeah.
they took pounding.
Yeah.
But I have much respect for those guys that in the service, in the, you know, Korean War, Vietnam
Yeah,
War,
right.
and Iraq War. You know, every war is war, no matter, and they're serving their country. And I was really disappointed in a lot of people in the United States, what they did to those Vietnam
Yeah.
veterans. That was a shame.
It was.
And
It was.
and to me, I had respect for them because they were over there. A lot of them got drafted.
Right.
And,
Right.
yeah.
Well, now, how long after the war then did you have to stay before you were finally had enough points to come home and could get discharged?
It was January
Okay, 46.
46. Now, when they got ready to discharge, I told them I was from Kansas, my folks. Well, when we got back and I got discharged, you know what they did? They gave me a bus ticket to Long Beach.
Oh, gee,
That's right.
where did you get discharged at?
Well, see, I enlisted in L.A.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So they get in L.A. So I went through the whole discharge. They give me, I think, $3.50 to go back to Long Beach. So I had to buy my own bus ticket back to Kansas. They did give me $300 for, you know, separation. And I was not that good of a student in school, and I went back to Kansas, and I goofed off until about August and went to Kansas City and started back in my career as a welder.
Okay.
Now all that time, I was in that 2020.
The 2052 club?
Yeah, you got $20.
A
So
week.
I went swimming and fishing. I just enjoyed myself.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, it was after then I was in my career. I first at Darby Corporation in Kansas City, Kansas, and I worked there in the shop, and then I got in the Boilermakers, and I got which made more money. Springfield, Missouri was my where I first went to work. So I traveled all over, half Missouri, all over Kansas, Nebraska, and Iowa. So all this time, and I was single then, and a lot of the guys that just work in Kansas City, they didn't want to travel.
Right, yeah.
And I'd take it, didn't make it difference 6 weeks, so that all the bosses knew that had jobs. So I never was without work. I'd go back in, and so I would, but I went to Scotts Bluff, and that's the longest I was ever on a job. That was 7 months. That's where I met my wife in September of 1951, and we got married in February the 24th in 1952. So we've been married a long time.
57 years.
So then we went back. Kansas City was there. We bought a house. Was there 2 years. She didn't like Kansas City. So we moved to Utah, and there I did use. So I did welding there too, and so I got the GI Bill. I bought a house, and it was $250 down. And I was making $75 a week. The house payments was $77 a month. So we completely went to the 29 years, whatever the loan was, at 4%. We lived in that house 43 years before we moved to Loveland. We've been here 10 years.
Now, what brought you to Loveland?
Well, her brother lived in the Wexford, and he had his 85th birthday, and we came over. They had a big surprise party for him. There's a restaurant out west it's not open now, on Eisenhower, and had a big party for him. And we was over here, the fourth time we come back to visit, he'd drive us around and he'd show us. And we want to move, our daughter's in Denver, but we don't want to move to Denver. He says, Loveland, you know, he said, it's a pretty nice place. So he looked around with a real estate lady, Century 21, and gosh, our place, we just put the house up and sold in 10 days, bam, just like that. So he does 4 places. We looked at this place, and we didn't want a corner lot, because in Utah, a corner lot wasn't all that good, that people drive across the field and all that. But we looked at this place and fell in love. It had the sunroom, and I could mow my lawn there in 20 minutes, and out here takes about an hour. But we love it here.
Oh, wonderful.
Really
And besides your daughter, any other children?
No.
Just the one daughter?
And she never married. She works for the city of Denver and social work. And I believe she's 57. And Denver's having a struggle with their budget there. And she was thinking about retiring, but she wanted to work another year. And so I think she's going to retire next June. Here, I retired when I was 65. I worked part-time until I was 70.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, I was 76 when we decided to move over here. Here we lived in that house 43 years. People say you're crazy. But anyway, we moved over here and really satisfied to be. We're still in contact with people over in Utah.
Well, Dick, I'll start to wind down this interview. One question I always like to ask towards the end is, during your military time during the war, how did that affect you? Did it play any sort of role in your life, change your life at all, change your thinking at all? Or was it just simply a chapter of your life that you went through, do you think?
I think it's just a chapter of life, because there was a lot of these fellas was about my age. Now, the ones that's really tough on is the guys that's married and had kids.
Okay, yeah.
And, you know, I'm glad they went home first.
Yeah.
And I never will forget, later on, after invasion of Utah Beach, and when we'd unload ships and stuff, I remember one time, and there's some Army guys on this ship, and those guys were going in, you know, this is probably maybe a couple of weeks after, and a lot of them guys, you know, if they was married, they really had, I felt so sorry for just to look at them, and see that worried look on him, you know. So,
Mm.
but you know, this is a whole different ball game. There's all the guys like got out of high school now. I remember during the Depression, the CCs, when and a couple of doors down was the neighbors. He's in CCs, and they was the first ones. It was in the military, because they was right. See, they was probably 3 or 4 years older than what I was.
Right.
And because I actually stayed out of the service over a year. See, worked, took training, worked in the shipyard. Of course, a lot of guys that jumped right in, volunteered. I just wasn't one of those guys that jumped right in.
Yeah,
you know?
right.
I figured I was doing some good welding, which at the time, you know, and so then I made a whole career of welding. I had, after I got out of service, like I say, I worked at Darby, and then I worked in the Boilermakers. And after I got married, well, Geri didn't like me traveling around, so I worked at General Motors, BOP plant in Fairfax, and Kansas City, Kansas. And it's a dual plant. They build jets and on this other side. And, you know, I was an arc welder. I never acetylene weld. So what would you believe when, see, for some reason, the plant was closed down and they rehired. So I went to there and applied for a job. And they put me on assembly line, acetylene welding.
Huh.
Now this is in 1952. Of course, completely, they got robots and all that. This was the old-fashioned way. That I was in the pit, and this guy was teaching me how. I burned a few holes. And so finally I got on there, and like on the Buick was the most, these 52 models, it's pit, and I had to weld a bracket overhead with the motor stuff. And then on the back, the door, go across and down. So, and each car is different. But the first week I worked there, I couldn't hardly lift up my arms.
Oh, geez.
So it took me a while, but after you get seasoned,
Yeah.
and it was a good job. I worked there probably 14 months, and I worked night shift. And just about the time I was ready to get on day shift, up in Detroit, something blew up there where they made the automatic thing. So it was the only thing they had. I think the power glide on the Chevy, they was putting that in a lot of things. So I wasn't going to get off the night shift, so I quit, and I went for work with Belgian Cartage Service. That's one that did had trucks, and I was a welder in that. And until we moved out to Utah.
Very good.
So I've done a little bit of everything.
I guess so, yeah. Well, Dick, I want to thank you for sitting down to tell your story today. More importantly, though, I want to thank you for your service to our country.
Well, thank you for that. Okay. Well, this picture was taken in Providence, Rhode Island, and the Navy uniform, the blouse was kind of, most everybody went to a tailor.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. Had them trimmed, yes.
Okay.
Now this is the Rhino barge unloading the LST. This barge was being towed across the bay there, and after they brought the barge around in front, then they loaded this anti-aircraft outfit on the on the Rhino. I was a signalman, and we was on the port side of this ship, and when I signaled, they'd tell me which side to go on, and here the barge is up against the ship, and they unloaded some equipment. After all the equipment was loaded on this Rhino, then we went to the beach because they didn't have a harbor, and this is how all the ships is unloaded, with the Rhino barges.